The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs will come to order. Ambassador Greenfield, what a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the our first subcommittee hearing of the 118th Congress regarding oversight of the United Nations. Now, while the President's budget has been delayed, this subcommittee has important oversight work that must be done to prepare for our next appropriation bills. That includes a review of our engagement at the United Nations, where the United States is the largest donor, providing over $12 billion annually. $12 billion. This significant investment from the American taxpayer is not exempt and should not be exempt from the expectation that we see that the U.S. interests are being advanced. The American people want to see a United Nations that supports and not undermines our security, and that our allies and partners also are not attacked or undermined by this institution. Unfortunately, the UN too often seriously fails there. And recent events have once again demonstrated that the ingrained, institutionalized anti-Israel bias at the United Nations is frankly, if anything, getting worse, not better. So the question before us is whether this administration has the political will to leverage our contributions and positions to advance our interest reform, to advance our reform interests and our national security interests at the UN, again, to be more effective in achieving peace and security, which obviously is a central tenet of the UN Charter. That starts with the UN's response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As we were reminded last week on the one-year anniversary of that horrific day, and every day since, the Security Council remains absolutely paralyzed by Russia and China, while too many UN member states are either just looking away, or others, like South Africa, are actually embracing Moscow, despite its flagrant violations of the UN Charter. So clearly, the UN must do better. Ambassador, over the last 2 years, I believe that the administration has really dismantled the leverage that we had at the UN on the premise that by merely just showing up and by providing U.S. funds without preconditions, that we can advance U.S. priorities. This has resulted in a UN that's clearly comfortable with its own broken situation and again, the continuation of the status quo. Let's take, for example, the Human Rights Council. This administration justified rejoining and re-engaging in the Council by promising that the U.S. would bring change. Ambassador, last year when you testified before this committee, we discussed my serious concerns about the Council, of which there are, frankly, too many to mention in the time that I have. These concerns, however, remain. The fixation on Israel and the membership that includes some of the worst human rights offenders in this planet. And so I hope you can report on progress since that hearing, but from the perspective up here, it just doesn't look good. Instead of successfully steering the Human Rights Council to focus on serial human rights abusers like Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua or Iran, the administration laid out the welcome mat last month for a special rapporteur. This is hard to believe. For a special rapporteur from the Council to examine U.S. counterterrorism practices, with a particular focus on the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay. So that person is now writing a report that will be published by that council, the same council that has the world's worst human rights abusers. Does anybody have any doubt? Is there any question about what that report is going to say? The U.S. taxpayer just footed the bill for that, and the Biden administration opened the door for a flawed, one-sided, biased view of history. Further, the UN and its agencies have yet to take successful action to address China's deliberate cover-up of the origins of COVID, and that's been in the news a lot recently. China continues to withhold critical information and refuses to comply with even the World Health Organization's investigation. And we see no action in the Security Council to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. But again, in stark contrast to China, I'm sure you agree that Taiwan's exclusion from the UN and its related bodies is a tremendous loss to humanity. Democratic Taiwan has so much to contribute to the world. So I hope, Madam Ambassador, that you can speak to administration efforts to support Taiwan's robust, meaningful participation in the UN system and in the wider international community. So, Madam Ambassador, these are just a few, because as I said, I could go on forever, of the many areas in need of significant reform to begin the conversation today. You've heard a tough assessment from me. It's not the first time. You've heard that again this morning, but I really believe that these questions and concerns are on the minds of the American people, and this subcommittee has to justify how every single American taxpayer money is appropriated, and to make sure that it is in the national security interests of the United States. I know, Madam Ambassador, that you have an exceedingly difficult job. And as I said to you a little while ago when we just said hi in the other room, I want to thank you. Thank you for the hard work that you do every day and the folks that work with you, and for your service to the United States of America. I look forward to your testimony and engaging and working with you on all of these important issues and some others that obviously we will have time later to talk about. So I will now turn to the ranking member and the former chair of this subcommittee, Ms. Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ambassador. I am very pleased, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, that our subcommittee's first official order of business this year is the critical issue of United States support for the United Nations, and I congratulate our new SFOP's chairman for bringing us together on this topic. It's extremely important as our first hearing. I'm even more glad to be hearing from you today, our esteemed United States Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, to discuss the important diplomatic engagement the Biden-Harris administration has been undertaking at the United Nations, its specialized agencies, and through UN peacekeeping. Thank you for joining us today and for having your many decades of experience in development and diplomacy, bringing it to such a critically important post at such a critical time. I can personally say, having a woman of color representing the United States on the largest stage in the world, especially when the great majority of the world is female, is incredibly powerful. The United Nations is an invaluable and irreplicable platform for fostering diplomacy and international peace and security. I've been privileged to serve as the United States Congressional Representative to the United Nations General Assembly on 5 different occasions. So I've seen firsthand the importance of these issues debated in New York and how much is at stake without UN engagement. The United Nations is central to the values and priorities of the United States. The UN's leadership in the Black Sea Grain Initiative to get available food from Ukraine to those facing famine was vital. Just last week, the United Nations negotiated 2 additional border crossings between Syria and Turkey to get badly needed humanitarian aid through to the earthquake victims. These accomplishments are solidly in the United States' interest and make the United Nations indispensable to the American people. That's why it's so important to be in the room, to be part of the conversation at the United Nations. We know what happens when we are not. I expect we will hear this morning about, of course, the bias at the United Nations against Israel. This bias is allowed to take shape, though, when the United States is missing, like the Commission on Inquiry on Israel. When we are absent, vacuums are created and filled by countries that do not share our values and our priorities. The United States must be present and fully participating in international institutions to protect our interests as well as advocate for our allies. Over the past 2 years, I've worked extremely hard with our committee, all of our colleagues, to make sure the United States was paying its share for these institutions. I truly wish we would have been able to go further in paying down our unpaid debts for peacekeeping, debts that have accumulated over the last 5 years and have now reached over $1 billion. We need to recognize the important role UN peacekeepers play in conflict zones and the benefits that we gain from burden sharing with other countries through UN peacekeeping missions. We simply cannot continue to tout these multilateral partnerships while at the same time maintain arbitrary caps on our contributions and rack up millions of dollars in arrears, leaving other countries, again avoid, to foot the bill. Not paying our dues weakens our ability to lead on a host of international issues and cedes ground to our strategic competitors. When the world unites, we can achieve amazing things. I am deeply concerned that we have lost ground on the Sustainable Development Goals, and achieving any of them by 2030 may be now out of reach. Investments that the United States has led on, such as HIV and AIDS, are very important part of the SDGs and a tangible expression of the goals chosen by people around the world aspiring to a better, safer world. I was proud of the work we've done as chairwoman to get the agreement that the United States needs to step forward, not back, on engagements such as rejoining of UNESCO. Also, I will continue to fight for support for UNFPA, that instead of being a political football, should be recognized for the tremendous work they do to support the health of mothers and babies. Throughout my time in Congress, I have consistently advocated for the strongest possible partnerships between the United States and the United Nations. We may not always agree with other nations on every issue, but we must always have a venue where we can hear from other countries and be heard ourselves. America is not always a perfect and consistent voice for human rights, but we can and have been vocal and persuasive. If we leave the table because we do not like who else is sitting there, we will allow those views to go unchallenged and be forced to live with the consequences. We need to keep making the case for human rights and human dignity. So, Madam Ambassador, thank you for your leadership and your devotion to diplomacy and for your testimony today.
I want to thank the ranking member. Ambassador, your full written testimony will be placed on the record, and please feel free to summarize the statement. Again, it's a privilege to have you here. You're recognized.
Thank you. I would welcome more visits so I can show you how vital our role is at the UN. Because without our leadership, China, Russia, and others hope to shape the United Nations and indeed the world in their authoritarian image. On my watch, we are not letting that happen. At the UN, we are galvanizing our allies and partners to tackle conflict, hunger, climate change, human rights abuses and violations, humanitarian crises, and so much more. And we're engaged in a strategic competition, especially with China, to ensure the values of freedom, democracy, and human rights prevail. Last week, we marked 1 year since Russia's brutal illegal invasion of Ukraine. At the UN, we have isolated Russia on the world stage. This past Thursday, 141 countries voted to call for an immediate withdrawal of Russian troops and for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. Russia is weak and alone, and this resolution showed Ukraine that global support for sovereignty and independence remains strong. Of course, we've been equally focused on the rest of the world. When disasters strike, we rally the international response. After the recent earthquakes in Syria and Turkey, we, for example, pushed for 2 more border crossings so that humanitarian aid could flow freely to Syrians in dire need. And last month, when I visited Somalia, I called on the international community to step up and break the cycle of extreme hunger and end famine. We do the same when human rights are abused and violated. When the Iranian regime was killing peaceful protesters in the streets, we took action. Iran's brave activists called on us to suspend Iran from the UN's Commission on the Status of Women. Iran's presence was a stain on the commission, and we removed it. Next week, I will lead the U.S. delegation to the commission, where we will continue to call out Iran and other repressive regimes that violate the rights of women. As part of our fight for human rights, we hosted a high-level UN event on the genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang. We highlighted the UN report, which laid out China's human rights violations in horrifying detail, and we are vigilantly combating all forms of hate at the UN, including anti-Semitism. A few weeks ago, we hosted with the Second Gentleman a special event at the UN focused on combating anti-Semitism. We also led the successful adoption of a UN General Assembly resolution to condemn Holocaust denials, the first of its kind in 15 years. Of course, we know that anti-Semitism is one dimension of anti-Israel bias at the UN, and that's something we work to counter every single day. We support a two-state solution and continue to push both sides to avoid escalatory actions that would move us further from achieving that goal. In the Security Council, we are addressing threats to international peace and security, like the conflict in Ethiopia, instability in Haiti, and missile launches from North Korea. And on North Korea, we're working to enforce strong UN sanctions to make it harder for Pyongyang to build nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. We are working to hold the UN itself accountable. We are actively advocating for a host of reforms to make the UN more effective, efficient, representative, and credible. Our goal is to bring the UN into the 21st century while rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. But the truth is, as we battle for our values enshrined in the UN Charter, the administration efforts to pay our bills in full have been only partially met by Congress. We continue to maintain high balances on arrears and pay late. It's China's favorite talking point. If we want to maintain U.S. leadership, we also need consistent, strengthened funding to recruit talented Americans into the UN system, which we are grateful that Congress has also recognized. We need your help to secure that funding and to build on our successes in the multilateral area. I'm committed to ensuring, with adequate staff, to fully monitoring how our funding is managed. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I have had the honor of serving our country for nearly 40 years under presidents from both parties. This moment is unique. America's global standing is at stake, so I want to thank you for your support and for your continuous communication, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador. Members, I will call on members based on seniority of those present when the hearing was called to order, obviously alternating between majority and minority. Each member will have 5 minutes for the questions and the ambassador's response. There will be calling votes, so I don't know if we'll have time for a second round, but hopefully we will. Ambassador, I'm concerned, and we've spoken a lot about Israel and the bias, anti-Israel bias. I'm really concerned by the pending advisory opinion on Israel sought by the Palestinians at the International Court of Justice. Again, another example of just rampant anti-Israeli bias at the UN. Last November, your deputy spoke out against the pending resolution, but regrettably, a UN official referred to the ICJ as, quote, the pinnacle of the international judicial system, end of quote. That was just 2 weeks prior, which really, frankly, solely confused the U.S. position. Ambassador, what actions are you taking or planning to take to prevent that the ICJ and the advisory opinion from being abused and weaponized to attack Israel? And if you want to also talk about who are potentially some of your allies and what the administration is doing to make sure that we get other countries to help out. And so with that, I'll.
Thank you so much for that question. And let me be clear, whenever the United States sees anti-Israel bias, we call it out and we address it directly. And as you noted, the UN is replete with anti-Israel actions and bodies, including disproportionate resolutions against Israel across the UN system. The open-ended commission of inquiry that you and Congresswoman Lee referred to is a recent example, and the recent request for the advisory opinion at the International Court of Justice. And we believe all of those actions have really not contributed to bringing peace for Israel and the Palestinians. And we've discouraged any actions by either side that would escalate the situation on the ground and push us farther away from achieving peace. My team is constantly vigilant on this issue. We watch it closely. I stay in close contact with the Israeli permanent representative in New York so that we don't let any opportunity that we can show our support for Israel pass. And I will continue to do that until my last day.
Ambassador, just a quick follow-up. Should the inevitable happen, which I fear it will, do you commit to correcting the U.S. record at the General Assembly that the ICJ is not the pinnacle of international justice, but just another instrument to attack Israel?
The ICJ does serve in some situations to support justice, but not in this particular case. And we've been clear in this particular case, this was not the right approach to use, and we've objected strongly to it. I don't know who made the statement, but I do make this statement here that we do not find this acceptable, that this was turned over to the ICJ.
The Honorable Ranking Member.
Thank you very much. Madam Ambassador, on Ukraine, a couple of things. Can you, and I was in Poland last year, and the United Nations was just beginning to gear up with its work in Ukraine. Would like to delve into how the U.S. now has been working with and through the United Nations to build support for Ukraine and condemn Russian aggression. Also, what more can be done, if anything, to rally the world and employ all of our diplomatic tools to help bring an end to this conflict? And finally, how are we able to, or how can we work with the UN to build support among countries in Latin America and Africa that have been more reluctant? I understand why, but have truly been more reluctant to take sides in this conflict. And can the United Nations help build more unity with the United States as it relates to Ukraine?
You know, Congressman, we have built a strong coalition of countries who have condemned Russia. 141 votes is nothing to sniff at. If we could have gotten 192 minus Russia, that would have been better. But only 7 countries voted to support Russia. And even those countries that abstained in their statements, both in the Security Council but also in the General Assembly, they expressed strong concerns about the situation and basically condemn Russia in their verbal statements. We can do more in terms of our own engagements with these countries. I work around the clock. If you saw my WhatsApp messages as we led up to the vote, I don't think I missed a country. And I was making phone calls at the same time. And we also had our embassies working across the world in pushing.
And Madam Ambassador, just not to interrupt you, but my colleague and I, the chairman and I, we disagree on Cuba, but can you, and that's well known, but could you let me know, how did Cuba vote on these issues as it relates to Ukraine in terms of?
Cuba abstained
Cuba
on the vote on Ukraine. That is, as I said, only 7 countries actually voted with Russia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Fleischman, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for being before us today. You have a very difficult job, and I sure appreciate everything you're doing in that regard. Thank you. I'm going to digress a little bit from my comments just to say I didn't expect this today, but thank you so much for your comments in support of Israel, our true ally in the Middle East. And my only ask would be to please continue to combat anti-Semitism wherever it exists all over the world. And the Holocaust deniers who are out there need to be called out. The Holocaust was horrific. It was probably the worst event of the last century, and the world can never forget what happened in that horrible time. So I do thank you for that rhetoric and the like. I'm going to move to my first question. As we all know, Madam Ambassador, the United Nations Security Council currently has 5 permanent members who hold veto power, namely the United States, Britain, France, Russia, and China. While these so-called permanent 5 made sense after World War II ended, their deep divisions led to gridlock during the Cold War. The gridlock today continues, even though Secretary Blinken and before him Secretary Pompeo found China to have engaged in genocide against the Uyghurs, and even though Russia under Vladimir Putin has launched an unprovoked and unjustified war against Ukraine. Yet at the same time, our ally, Japan, and our strategic partner, India, have never been made permanent members of the Security Council, even though Japan is the world's third largest economy and a technical powerhouse, and even though India is the world's largest democracy and rising power in the Indo-Pacific. My question to you, Madam Ambassador, is it not long past due for the United States to push for Japan and India to be included as permanent members of the UN Security Council?
Thank you so much for that question, and it really is an important question for me because I launched in September a discussion on Security Council and broader UN reform, in which we announced and the President amplified at the high-level week that we support Security Council reform. We have to make this council more inclusive and more representative. And the Permanent Five was built into the charter. I can't change that, but we can change and add additional permanent members as well as additional elected members of the council. I have been engaged over the course of the past few months in what I've referred to as a listening tour, talking to all regions, all countries of the world, with the idea of moving forward on some kind of reform that allows us to bring new countries into the Security Council. Japan currently is an elected member. India was an elected member for the past 2 years, and both of them have expressed desires to be permanent members.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. I'm looking at my time as it begins to wane, so I will focus on the crux of this next question. It deals with Diego Garcia and the British Indian Ocean territories. Madam Ambassador, there have been 2 rounds of secret negotiations regarding the control over the British Indian Ocean territory, or the Chagos Islands, as moratorious attempts to wrest control of the remote island territory away from the United Kingdom. My big concern is, obviously, this is a key United States base, and I wanted to stress our support to keep that vital base on Diego Garcia going and our support of the British in that regard. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on this issue.
I don't have anything new on that, but when I served as Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, it was an issue that was on my plate, and it was an issue that I engaged with the Mauritian government on, as well as the British government, with the idea that we maintain U.S. control of that island. But I don't have anything currently new. We can get back to you with what's happening.
Thank you very much, and Madam Ambassador, I thank you again. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fleischman. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for delivering such great and brave speeches at the UN on behalf of the United States. I would like to hear more from you about how the administration can leverage UN resources to address migration in Central America and help bring stability to the region. There are still many Central Americans who are forced to flee their homes to escape persecution. I am very concerned with the developments in the region, such as the detainment last July of award-winning Guatemalan journalist Jose Ruben Zamora, founder and president of the newspaper El Periódico. He has spent 215 days in a Guatemalan prison simply for telling the truth about what is happening in his government. In many countries, the UN plays an important role in the fight against corruption. I understand Honduras has now decided to work with the UN to create an anti-corruption commission. However, in the same year that Honduras is creating an anti-corruption commission, Guatemala has cracked down on those who worked with its own UN-backed anti-corruption commission in previous years. It is alarming and unacceptable that those who cooperate with the UN in the fight against corruption in Guatemala are now being persecuted. So what is the role of the UN in Central America, specifically as it relates to anti-corruption, given everything that has happened in recent years?
Let me just start by saying early in my tenure, with the support of the Vice President, I called together all of the UN agencies working on migration issues along the border, but also working in Latin America, and donors as well, to commit to focusing attention on the situation in the border, but also working with those countries to ensure that they provide the protection that they're required to provide under the human rights laws, and that they work more closely with the United Nations. And there was a strong commitment to that. We're following what the UN is doing very closely. I don't have anything specific on the Guatemalan case. We'll ask our WHA colleagues to come back to you on specifically what is happening there. But I know that the UN, particularly UNHCR and the Human Rights Council Commission, are following the situation there very closely and doing everything they can to provide protection to him, but also others who've become victims of this government.
My concern, Ambassador, is history continues to repeat itself. Guatemala's CICIG, the UN Anti-Corruption Commission that was created, the commissioner, was threatened by the government when he left to visit or to a hearing outside of the country. He was refused entry. El Salvador tried to create CICEs that never happened, and now Honduras. So what are the lessons here, and how? I don't want Honduras to be set up to fail like the other two countries. Creating an organization where we will just throw good money after bad actors. That needs to stop. That bleeding needs to stop. So what are the lessons that we have learned, and how can we support good actors from being persecuted the way that they are? We have two former attorney generals here on asylum visas. We have a former prosecutor, investigator who was working with CICIG in Guatemala here on an asylum visa. Not only are we taking on, hundreds and thousands of people that are coming to our southern border asking for help, we are also taking on those brave actors. And I disagree that throwing good money and getting private dollars to support these governments isn't a good idea, because corruption will continue. And I yield back, Mr. Chair.
We'll have to wait for the answer on that one. But Mr. Carl, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Ambassador, welcome to the Hill,
Thank you.
and thank you for your service to this country. I read your bio yesterday, and it's quite impressive, so thank you. I got two very quick questions. Hopefully, I won't burn a whole 5 minutes, so somebody else can jump in here. But I appreciate that you vowed to stand against the unfair targeting of Israel through the UN program, such as the open-ended Commission of Inquiry. Can you please discuss the current status of the inquiry and the harm it poses to any hope of peace between Israel and Palestinians?
we have been clear that we think this commission of inquiry is unacceptable. And the first opportunity that we had to engage on this issue in the General Assembly, Ambassador Chris Liu worked diligently to decrease the budget by 25% and push back on the number of staff. We've not seen any of their reports yet. I will say that this commission was set up when we were not on the Human Rights Council. And this is why I think it's so important that we're on that council so that we can stop this kind of, these kinds of actions from happening in the future.
So do you see us getting on that council?
I'm sorry?
Do you see the ability for us to get on that council?
We're on the Human Rights Council now. We
Yeah.
rejoined the Human Rights
Okay.
Council in January. And I will say we've had some extraordinary successes. We were able to kick Russia off of the Human Rights Council. We were able to set up a commission of inquiry on the situation in Iran, a commission of inquiry on the situation in Ethiopia. So I think it's important that we are there, and we will continue to push for human rights in those countries where we need to focus on human rights and push against efforts to put all of the attention, for example, on Israel.
Thank you. So I've just spent a week in Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, and your ambassadors down there are incredible, the staff, the people that work down there. But my question is, you know, the UN, the development activities in the countries and territories with Sustainable Development Goals, better known as SDGs, I'm learning all these acronyms, are currently receiving billions of dollars, American dollars. Roughly how much of those funds would you say are going towards staff and other overhead costs other than going directly to heading of the sustainable development itself?
I can't give you a specific figure, but we can get back to you on that. That's something that we monitor very, very closely because we want to make sure that funds are going to programs and not just funding structures and more staff than are necessary. And again, I have Ambassador Chris Liu constantly working on that issue. It's his 24/7 day job.
Well, one thing I did see down there, although you had incredible people, there certainly were well-staffed. I just want to make sure that money is making it where it needs to go, because we're all trying to, both sides of the aisle, thank goodness, are trying to tighten our belts a little bit and get us in a little better place as far as financially. So
I can assure you that that is one of my highest priorities as well.
good. Well, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I yield my time back.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. When you learn all the acronyms, maybe you can teach them to me as well. The gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your work. And I just want to echo the words of my colleagues to just urge your continued pushback on anti-Semitism. And I will move to a subject near and dear to my heart, which is the condition of the world for women and girls. Interestingly, just coincidentally, last night I had an opportunity to be at a dinner with many women ambassadors to the United States. It was a very common thread of concern about violence against women, especially girls out of school, refugees, Ukraine, for example, the kidnapping of so many children, women obviously being left to take care of their families because their men were in war. We heard from the former ambassador of Afghanistan who was near tears because of what's happening in Afghanistan every day as women just have lost just about every right they had gained. I guess I could go on and on. I had a group from Iraq in my office the other day, concerned there. And so I don't want to make it sound like the world is terrible for women, but there's obviously a lot going on there. So, and it could be, I know My colleague, Ms. Torres, could tell you about what's happening in South America. We have visited Africa together here, my colleague on my left here. And so here's my question. Tell us first of all, what you think are the most important issues facing the girls and women of the world, and what kind of things the UN are doing to promote their safety, their education, their health, their welfare, economic well-being.
Thank you so much for that question, and I feel the same commitment to this issue as you do and so many others. The situation in Afghanistan with women being forced to remain home and not work, and girls not going to school is appalling. Iranian women being brutalized and killed in the streets, Ukrainian women being raped and brutalized, and so we can go on and on. So what are the important issues? It is protection for women. And we have to make sure that in every resolution that we pass in the Security Council and in the General Assembly, that we recognize and highlight the importance of focus on women and girls, on education, on health, and on safety. We saw in Ethiopia as well as in Ukraine, rape being used as a tool of war. We have to also look at accountability. How do you hold those who commit those crimes against women? How do you hold them accountable and ensure that they don't commit those crimes again? And I think if we can focus on those areas, on their education, their health, and their security, I think we get to the bulk of it. But we have to do it in every single resolution that we're working on, and every single opportunity that we
Excuse me,
have.
not to interrupt, but can you give me some examples of some of the efforts of the UN?
You know, we have worked with the UN and in the Security Council to condemn the situation both in Afghanistan as well as in Iran. We had something called an ARIA formula meeting at the United Nations where we brought a large number of co-sponsors and Iranian activists to highlight the situation in Iran and bring the situation to the forefront in the United Nations. And of course, in Ukraine, we're constantly raising these
Excuse
issues
me,
with
also,
the UN.
there are many UN agencies, correct?
Yes.
That are working with refugees and promoting health and so forth.
UNICEF, I'll start with UNICEF, where there's an American head. UNICEF focuses on children, but they also focus on issues of women and girls because they're very much related. We're working with UN Women, and we've had UN Women come and brief the Council on several occasions on the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Afghanistan, as well as the situation in Iran. We work closely with World Food Program, where hunger is more prevalent among women than others, and if women are not allowed to work, for example, in Afghanistan, then they will not get humanitarian assistance. So we're working very closely with World Food Program to ensure that they develop programs that will target women and make sure that aid and humanitarian assistance is able to get through to them.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you.
Hughes.
Mr. Turner, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very pleased to be here with you on the subcommittee, my first subcommittee. And Madam Ambassador, very pleased to be with you as well today. I've appreciated much of what you've had to say. I would like to start talking about UNRWA. While both the UN and the Biden administration have continually said that steps are being taken to address continued demonstrations of anti-Semitism, to monitor curriculum, and to prevent the construction of tunnels under UNRWA facilities, these things continue to happen. And we see the same response: a promise of an investigation, staffers put on leave, a statement of condemnation, and then another violation occurs and we're back to square one. Clearly, the steps the administration has taken to address and more critically prevent these violations from occurring are not enough. What will your administration do to prevent the construction of terror tunnels under UNRWA schools and other facilities? It is difficult for any of us to justify hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for an agency when they cannot even ensure this basic level of oversight is being conducted.
Thank you so much for that question. Last year, I visited Israel and met with UNRWA. I also saw a tunnel. It wasn't under an UNRWA school, but the Israelis took me to see one of these tunnels and the intense work that goes into developing these tunnels. And let me just start by saying that UNRWA provides needed services to the most desperate people among the Palestinians, education. And the fact that terrorists are using their, are victimizing them by turning their facilities into possible places where they might operate, although I have to say I didn't see that, is absolutely unacceptable. And I had a very intense and very strong conversation with the UNRWA leadership, both there as well as in New York when they've come through New York, to ensure that they do everything in their power to not allow their facilities, their materials to be used for terrorist purposes. And I will continue to work on that. We have an MOU with UNRWA that the State Department's Office of Population, Refugees, and Migration is managing, and they monitor them constantly. But also, I see it as my responsibility as well.
Well, I appreciate that, and I believe you when you say you don't want this to happen. None of us want this to happen. I think I'm looking more specifically, what can you and the administration do to prevent this specifically from happening?
You know, we have I've even had discussions with the Palestinians on this issue, because what is happening damage them as well. It damages the authority, but it victimizes students, and we've called it out when we've seen it. And we've condemned it when we have seen it as well. As you know, these tunnels are being built by terrorists, and we have declared them as terrorists, and we have also sanctioned them as terrorists.
Recent reports, shifting gears a little bit, recent reports have uncovered completely unacceptable behavior by Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, including repeatedly demeaning the memory of the Holocaust, comparing Israel to the Nazis, and participating in conferences alongside leaders of U.S.-designated terrorist organizations such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Given these actions, I do not see how anyone could expect her to be an unbiased observer on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories. Are you planning to call for the removal of Special Rapporteur Albanese from her position?
We find her statements, her public stances, completely unacceptable. We have raised our concerns in the highest levels of the United Nations, and we will continue to do that. We have called for the UN to take actions against those individuals in the UN system who've shown a bias toward Israel, particularly in terms of public statements.
Will you call for her removal?
I have not specifically called for her removal, but I have called attention to what she's doing, and the UN system has to take that action.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Now I will recognize again another former chairman of this subcommittee and the Dean of the House of Representatives, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this conference, this hearing. Madam Ambassador, Iran has made significant gains towards achieving nuclear weapon capabilities. Recent reports from the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, show that it found uranium enriched at nearly 84% in Iran, which is dangerously close to the 90% threshold to reach nuclear weapons grade material. Iran allegedly explains that this significant uptick is a momentary side effect of trying to reach a finished product of 60% purity. However, that assurance is hardly comforting. Given Iran's previous obstructions to UN and IAEA nuclear inspections, how can we be sure Iran is not intentionally increasing its enrichment efforts to use for nuclear weapons? And number two, if the international community is unable to reach a tenable agreement with Iran on nuclear weapons, what actions are the Biden administration willing to take to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them? Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for that question. And yes, we have seen that Iran has increased their production since leaving the JCPOA. And President Biden has been very, very clear that he will not allow Iran to gain nuclear capabilities, to gain a nuclear weapon. Over the course of the past year, we have been focusing a tremendous amount of attention on the Iranians' attacks on Iranian people, and have in fact kicked them off of the Commission on the Status of Women. And we've been focusing attention on what they are doing with the Russians. But we have not lost sight of what they're doing on the nuclear side. And I, again, stress that the president has been clear that we will not stand by and allow them to gain nuclear capabilities. And we're pressing Iran to allow for IAEA inspections and to comply with IAEA rules.
Well, again, reports from the UN show that IAEA found uranium enriched at nearly 84%.
Yeah.
That's significantly up, and it's close to 90% to reach nuclear weapons grade. It's no longer time to talk. It's time to act. What can you assure us?
I can assure you that the administration is very aware of this and prepared to act when necessary.
You don't consider it necessary now?
I won't project when and how the administration will respond, but I know that the administration is prepared to.
Well, you are the administration.
I'm the UN ambassador, and certainly I'm watching this very, very closely, and I know that the president is committed.
Well, they're at 84% now, and 90% is considered nuclear weapons grade. I mean, they're within inches of having the bomb.
And we've seen that. I saw the report this morning. It is very, very worrisome, and I know that we are looking at how we respond. I don't even think we want to. If I knew the answer, I wouldn't want to share that with you in a public space, but I know that the administration is focused very, very intensely on this.
In what way?
Again, in determining how we will respond. And when?
They're going to listen to you for advice, I assume.
I hope so.
And what will you tell them?
That this is something we need to be working on immediately.
And I know nothing about it, but I can tell you it's time. Thank you.
Thank you to the Dean. We should be able to do another round, Ambassador, so thank you for your patience. Ambassador, when the administration announced, let's go back to the UN, to the Human Rights Council, that it would run for election at the Human Rights Council in 2020, it did so under the premise that the United States would be more effective force at countering a disproportionate bias against Israel. And you and I talked about this before, last year actually, when you testified before the subcommittee. It doesn't seem like much has been accomplished there since then. Let me ask you, what measurable progress have you made to institute baseline standards for membership? So countries like Cuba and China are just ineligible. You mentioned how Russia was tossed out. You know, they should have never been in there in the first place. So what progress have you made to institute, measurable progress to have baselines so that these, horrific dictatorships, human rights abusers, don't qualify to be on the Human Rights Council?
Clearly, the council is flawed. There are human rights violators on the council, and I do think it was a significant accomplishment that we were able to get enough votes to kick Russia off of the council. We work every day to encourage countries that are like-minded to seek membership on the council and work every day to support their efforts to run for the council. Unfortunately, the system requires a membership vote, and countries that are human rights violators want to get on the council so they can block the action of the council. But us being there, we give courage to others to join. We give courage to those who are on the council, and I was told that specifically when we rejoined the council by some of the members, that having us there gives them the power and the courage to stand up to these human rights violators.
And Madam Ambassador, and again, I have great respect for you, you know that. I mean, I really do. But what you're hearing, whether from Mr. Turner or the Dean of the House or myself, is what we don't hear, we don't see measurable progress. Great statements. And by the way, statements can be very important, but we don't see measurable progress. And it's $12 billion that the United States, that the American taxpayer is putting into this institution, to the UN as a whole. And again, so that's why we keep asking for measurable progress, and that is one thing that we just have not gotten.
Yeah, we've made progress. I mean, we've made progress in ensuring that human rights stays at the center of many of the issues we're engaged in. The fact that we got a commission of inquiry on Iran was a huge deal. If we were not on the council, that would not have happened. I think had we been on the council, we would not have a commission of inquiry that is unlimited on Israel. Being on the council, we were able to expose Russia and get a commission of inquiry to look at that situation. So I think we have had some successes, but I will admit, it's challenging. We're sitting at the table with other human rights, with others who are human rights violators, but we fight them every single day. And if we're not there, we can't fight them.
And again, I don't question your commitment to that, but again, I think you understand our frustration. And by the way, I think...
And I'm frustrated too.
Correct, and your frustration as well. To the ranking member, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I see the progress also, understanding issues of human rights all around the world, including in our own country. It's difficult to make the progress, but under your leadership and this administration's leadership, there's been a total shift, I think. And so just on the glass half full side, I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you very much. The Sustainable Development Goals, going back to what my colleague mentioned earlier, just to break down exactly what they are, they're a common framework that all of our development partners have signed on to. They help explain the work of the United States and what it's doing overseas, as well as to help measure how far we have to go on alleviating poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring that all people have access to peace and prosperity. So just let me ask you, in terms of the conversations happening at the United Nations, how to get the SDGs back on track after the negative impacts of the COVID pandemic, and how are various parts of the UN system working together to support countries in their pursuit of SDGs? Secondly, are the goals still achievable by 2030, and are they being tracked and measured? Are there bright spots? And then finally, so many of the SDGs are applicable to here in our own country with vulnerable populations, especially communities of color. And I want to find out from you, how do you see we can better integrate these SDGs with U.S. development programs and policy and priorities in our own country?
Thank you so much for that question. First, let me just say that we're committed to implementation of the SDG goals by 2030, both here at home as well as abroad. And over the course, because we're having the major SDG summit in September, right now there's laser focus on pushing that agenda forward. My office, I'm meeting with my office on a regular basis. Ambassador Lisa Carty leads that. And she has her staff focused on these as well. And we're working very, very closely with the various UN agencies in terms of identifying how they can do a better job of moving forward on the SDG goals, but also kind of taking stock of what they have accomplished. And so we're meeting with individual agencies on that on a regular basis. The Deputy Secretary General is leading that process, and I have engaged with her also to, one, reaffirm our commitment, but also to encourage them to ramp up their efforts, because we think that expanding economic opportunity, both here and abroad, taking care of our planet, promoting good governance, and ensuring that we leave no one behind is a global issue, and it's a global goal. And we think the SDGs will get us closer to achieving those goals.
Do you see major setbacks, and do we need to escalate our efforts in some of these areas?
There have been setbacks because of COVID, and the war in Ukraine contributed to some setbacks as well. So yes, we do need to focus more attention on those goals here, and I would support your focusing on them from Congress.
Thank you very much. I'll yield my time.
I thank the ranking member. The Dean of the House, Mr. Rogers.
After the Russian bludgeoning of Ukraine, Congress included a directive in the last appropriations bill to the Secretary of State to work with the UN to reduce their reliance on Russian military equipment, especially for peacekeeping operations. The House bill carried much stronger language, appropriately so, which prohibited U.S. funding to pay for Russian equipment. Remarkably, it was not retained in the final agreement. What specific steps have you taken to get the UN to move away from paying for Russian military equipment?
Again, thank you for that question, and it is something that we have focused on over the past year. We have worked with the UN's contracts and compliance office to open up the biddings for more companies to bid on these UN contracts. We're trying to encourage more American companies to bid on the contracts, and we're encouraging more transparency on the part of the UN. And we have made some progress on that. I can get more details to you on exactly what has happened, but it's something that we are working on.
Please submit that for the record. For the current budget year, how much funding has the UN expended on Russian equipment, both new purchases and maintenance?
Okay, I'll have to get back to you on that as well.
I thank you. Now yield back.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, and just wanted to go back, my last statement to you. On the issue of refugees, it is not limited to Central America or South America. It's a global issue. It's a very, very tough global issue that, we watch every single day how it impacts primarily women and children. Can you talk a little bit more about the work of the UN in addressing the issues of what can we improve? I mean, are we arming the strong men that are forcing, these families to flee? What can we do to ensure that they are protected? And where can they go when every country around the world seems to be closing, their borders to these people that have no other place to go?
Thank you for that question. As you know, I spent most of my career working on refugee issues. UNHCR is reporting that we have the highest number of refugees since World War II, with more than 13 million people having been forced to move out of Ukraine most recently. Interestingly, I actually see that countries, when I look at Ukraine specifically, Ukrainian neighbors open up their borders to Ukrainians. I was in Poland and saw that they're allowing Ukrainian refugees to integrate into their communities.
As did Colombia and Chile when it came to Venezuelan refugees.
Yeah, and I was in Ecuador and saw, Ecuador has huge numbers of Venezuelan refugees. It's putting pressure on these countries, as we know. And so even here in the United States, people, when things get tough, they blame the people who are coming in from outside, and we're seeing that happen elsewhere around the world. But UNHCR has really focused tremendous efforts on its protection mandate. It has the mandate to protect refugees, and it's something that we work very diligently on ourselves. I was in Somalia recently, and Kenya. Kenya has 450,000 refugees. Those refugees have been there for 3 generations. The Kenyan president said to me, and I was really pleased, that these people have no home to go back to. They only know Kenya. And he's looking at how they can be integrated into communities as well. So we're working to find options to find permanent situations where refugees can be integrated into communities. And there's a real concerted effort to support those activities.
I was in Sudan and South Sudan last year, traveled with the UN. It was tragic, very, very sad situation on the refugee camps where we were not allowed to go inside. We were allowed to, look inside from a tower. So if it's not safe for us to, walk and visit and talk with the people inside, living inside these
These are in South Sudan,
In
the
South Sudan.
IDP camps.
Yes.
Yeah.
How can children thrive in these environments? And at some point, how do we incorporate them into the countries that are hosting them?
Children don't thrive in those environments, and the UNHCR does provide education, and they provide health programs for refugees. And we do have a resettlement program where we are, and it's a worldwide resettlement program. There are a number of countries that do resettlement, but resettlement can't address the larger issue. So we have to work with countries to find mechanisms where refugees can access the services that are available in in those countries, and we have to support those countries providing those services.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you again for being here with us, and I yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. Turner, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. I'd like for you to comment broadly about religious liberty and what you think your role is in promoting that at the UN.
Religious liberty, religious freedom is a human right. And so we focus also on that as a human right, and whether it is focusing on what is happening in, for example, in places like Ukraine, where there are issues, or whether we're focusing in Africa where there may be issues of religious freedom, is something that we call out, is something that the Human Rights Council focuses attention on, and it's something that we address every time we see it.
So I'm sure you're familiar with President Ortega exiling 222 religious political prisoners to the United States recently. What you also might be aware of, but if not, I'd like to talk about it. There's a man by the name of Bishop Alvarez. He's a Roman Catholic bishop of the Diocese of Matagalpa in central Nicaragua. He's advocated for political and religious freedom for all Nicaraguans and has been considered a critic of the Ortega regime's violence against protesters and political opponents since 2018. Bishop Alvarez has called for democratic reforms and an end to persecution of the Catholic Church, whose clergy and missionaries have been targeted by detentions, deportations, and death threats. The bishop was first detained under house arrest in August 2022 when he refused to board the plane with the 222 political prisoners. He was imprisoned. The next day, his trial began earlier than scheduled, and he was convicted of treason, undermining national security, and spreading false news. He has now been sentenced to 26 years in prison for exercising the freedoms that we do every day here in the United States. And so I bring all that up in the hopes that that's something that you can help with, specifically this case that I just mentioned.
Well, I appreciate you raising it with me, and I will raise it and focus attention on it. I know that our embassy is absolutely engaged on this, and I know that our Western Hemisphere Bureau is engaged on this issue. But in New York, I can assure you that I will as well.
I look forward to continuing to communicate about this specifically. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Frankel, you're recognized.
Thank you. So I want to sort of get a little bit more specific on some of the questions that I went over earlier. Again, thank you for your service. So, we spoke before about what's happening to women and girls in Afghanistan. Just every day, Taliban clamping down, banned from secondary schools, from universities, from working at NGOs. They're banished from the public sphere. It's my understanding that the UN is still on the ground. So really, my line of questioning now is because we are asked to fund the UN. I think it's important for people to know some of the efforts of UN agencies. So if you could help us with, for example, now Afghanistan, UN still on the ground. Is there any hope or any what can be done to help the women and the girls?
The UN is still on the ground. UNAMA is an important partner of ours, and they're working diligently to find a way to support Afghan women. We also have a number of international NGOs as well that are working. And what I was told in a recent briefing is that there are actually some areas inside of Afghanistan where this edict is not being fully implemented. And so there are some girls in very limited areas and locations who are able to go to school.
I guess the big question here is, can we still get the money to these NGOs without the Taliban getting hold of the money?
We are still supporting international NGOs that are not working directly with the Taliban. UNAMA is trying to work, I know, with some of what they consider less or you know less aggressive members of the Taliban to see how they can find a way to push them to push inside their system to change this edict, because ultimately that is what's going to make a difference, and that is reversing the edict. It's hard to work around an edict that does not allow women to work, because the majority of the people in need are women, and they can only be accessed by women. And we've discouraged them from using men to replace women in these key positions. So I know that they are working to try to find a way around this and find ways to get assistance directly to the women in need.
Let me change just a little bit. We've heard reports that there have just been hundreds of Ukrainian children kidnapped to Russia. Could you tell us about that and any efforts to stop it or to get the children back?
I spoke about that in the Security Council and the General Assembly as well last week. We are very concerned and appalled by the fact that thousands of Ukrainian children have been forcibly adopted.
Are they being taken off the streets of Ukraine, or when they cross borders? How are they?
Most of them are taken in the areas where Russia has gained control. Some of them were in orphanages already and may have lost their families in the fighting. I'm not quite sure where they're taking them all from, but we do know that they are taking, they're forcibly taking these children, issuing Russian passports and putting them in Russian homes.
And, I mean, is there anything?
I
guess the question is, what can be done, or what is being done?
NGOs, the UN, they're all attempting to engage the Russians on this, who are denying that they're forcing children away from their homes. But this is something we have to hold them accountable for. Of the many atrocities that they have committed, this is among the worst.
All right, sorry to end on that note. Okay, yield back.
Good questions. And Ambassador, they called votes, but I'm going to ask if we can just do maybe some quick questions.
Okay.
Less than 3 minutes. I'm going to go back to UNRWA. The bill, the State Foreign Operations Bill requires that prior to funds being obligated, that the Secretary must report on whether they're complying with several important requirements related to incitement of violence against Jews and the use of their facilities by terrorists. Now, remarkably, despite continuing violations, the Secretary has continued to say that UNRWA is complying. And so what are you asking, what specifically are you asking UNRWA for in terms of reform and accountability? Where are we? What do we have to show as far as reforms that UNRWA has committed to?
Yeah, we, as I mentioned earlier, we have an MOU that is being monitored very, very closely by our colleagues in the State Department's Office of Population, Refugees, and Migration. But every single one of us who work with the UN also take on the responsibility of monitoring and also ensuring that UNRWA is abiding by our requirements.
And Ambassador, I apologize because I'm going to keep myself to the term to the time as well. And so, but specifically, if you can get back to me on some of those, I think would be helpful to the ranking member.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you, Madam Ambassador, despite well-intentioned reforms, allegations of sexual assault and abuse continue with regard to peacekeepers. So is the UN holding troops from contributing countries accountable for the actions of their forces? And just where are we in terms of sexual assault?
Again, something we're engaged on a regular basis. So there was one peacekeeping country that was removed the entire country from a peacekeeping operation because of allegations of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. We are also aware of several cases in which individuals have been held accountable, and we require that countries prosecute them in their own country. And we're following those cases very, very closely, but they were removed from the peacekeeping operations.
This is a perennial problem, so we are making progress, though.
We're making some progress.
Okay, okay.
It's
thank
still
you.
a challenge.
It's still a
I won't say we've been totally successful, but we are making progress. And countries understand that if they are going to continue to participate and benefit from participating in peacekeeping operations, they have to ensure that their troops do not commit sexual abuse and exploitation.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you. Let the record show that the chair and the ranking member kept under time. The Dean of the House, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for convening this hearing on a matter of utmost importance. The People's Republic of China has outsized influence at the UN, and it's used that platform to promote its domestic initiatives. For example, China has been successful at blocking Taiwanese access to the UN, or even allowing Taiwanese tourists to visit UN buildings. These actions have broader implications and show China can reshape rules and norms. As the largest contributor to the UN, the United States should have the leverage to push back on Taiwan's access issue and others. What steps are you taking to curb China's authoritarian approach?
Let me just say, we have seen this in big and small ways, that they are using their presence in the UN to reshape how the UN functions, and they have shown that they are willing to use all aggressive methods here to challenge both our interests and our values at the United Nations, which is why it is so important that we are there constantly to push back on them. Our strategy is to literally, at every single step, we have people looking at all of the UN documents to make sure that China is not inserting their values, their narrative, their language into UN documents. We're pushing hard on the Taiwan issue to get Taiwanese access to any kind of event or any facility that does not require member state. But it's been tough, and part of what's been tough is the Chinese have gained power over the past 4 years. They really moved into spaces that we were not filling. They have a lot of staff in the UN system, and they're using that power. They're paying more on something we push for, but they also criticize us for not paying our dues and our arrears. And that's why I think it's so important that we pay our dues, we pay our arrears, and we compete with strength, in a position of strength against the Chinese. I see their actions every day, and we fight against their actions every single day. But we need, I would say strongly, we need the resources to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Ms. Frankel.
Thank you. Well, on that area of paying dues, I think not enough people know about some of the good things that the UN does. I mean, we are all aghast at the position on the anti-Semitism. Again, I urge you to keep pushing back on that. But in terms of some other areas, especially keeping children safe, preventing child marriage, FGM, sex and labor trafficking. Which are the agencies that are part of the UN that you are confident are doing a good job in this area?
I think UNICEF is doing an extraordinary job in focusing attention on all of these issues. We saw this, particularly child marriages and sexual exploitation of children, actually increase during COVID because children were not in school. And girls were not in school, and I've seen UNICEF really again focus tremendous attention on these efforts. The current head of UNICEF is an American, and she came with a tremendous amount of experience in this area, and I know that she has really galvanized her staff to address these issues.
I thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go vote, and I yield back, and thank you for this hearing. Thank you, Madam
you.
Ambassador. Wish you the best.
Ambassador, again, thank you again for your time, and even more important, that's for your service to this country. This concludes today's hearing, and members may submit any additional questions for the record, and without the Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs stands adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you for being here. I know we expect you to know a lot. You did a good job.